Hello everyone, I know you watched this video to accompany you to sleep. So if you like this video, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Also, don't forget to tell me where you are from and what time you watched this video. Let's jump straight into the story. Story 1. The city of Weatherford in Texas, home to the Kahler family. James Craig Kahler, who went by Craig, his wife Karen, their 2 daughters, 18-year-old Emily and 16-year-old Lauren, and a son, 10-year-old Sean. Karen and Craig had been together for many years. Craig was in his last year of his engineering degree at Kansas State University when he met Karen, who was in her first year. They were both ambitious and bright students and shared a lot in common. Friends said that they were the couple everyone was always trying to live up to, and everyone knew they would be successful when they graduated. They soon married and had their first daughter, Emily, and in 1999, an opportunity came along. Craig was offered the job of utility director of Weatherford, Texas. It was not only a very well-paying job, but a well-respected one too. They settled into a nice home and had 2 more children, Lauren and Sean. Neighbors said they were a key part of the community, always involved with everything, and keen to welcome new people to the area, with Karen often baking cakes and making food for everyone. Emily attended the St. Louis College of Pharmacy, and Lauren was an honor student at a Columbia high school. The teams were also in a band where they both played and sang, often showcasing their talents around town. Neighbors said that as cliché as it sounded, they really were the all-American family, and a lot of people in the area really admired them. But all was not as it seemed. One day, Karen's sister Lynn got a call. Karen wanted to confide in her about the true state of their marriage. She told Lynn that over the years, Craig had changed. He had started giving her curfews and an allowance, which she supervised and scrutinized, demanding to see receipts for all of her purchases, even everyday things like food. He would demand sex every night at 8 p.m. exactly, and everything she did in the house had a timer on it. She said she did everything he asked to keep the peace, but things were getting worse, and she felt trapped and scared. Karen told her she wanted to look for an outlet, something that was just hers that he couldn't control. She decided to join a local gym around the children's school hours, and Craig being at work. Friends said that she was soon there so much, and keen to learn, she was eventually hired as a fitness instructor. A completely different career path, but something she was excited to do. To her surprise, when Craig found out she had been going, he approved, telling her as long as she was home on time to look after the children, there would be no issues. One day at the gym, Karen bumped into Sonny Reese, another personal trainer. From the get-go, the pair were inseparable. They had a lot in common, and spent all their shifts together. Before long, a romantic relationship developed, and the couple began an affair. Lynn said that she felt like her sister was so mentally beaten down at that point, when she found someone that seemed to really care about her and didn't want to control her. The relationship just fell together naturally. Karen knew she had to come clean and tell Craig everything. To her total shock, Craig did not seem to have an issue with it, far from it in fact. He encouraged it and started messaging Sunny, sending her flowers and asking her for a threesome. People say he saw it as an opportunity to spice up their marriage and sex life. He told Karen he didn't have any problem with it, as long as he was included and she didn't leave him. But Karen and Sunny wanted no part of the threeple he was suggesting. They wanted it to just be them. Craig was embarrassed, and now he knew there was no chance of bringing Sunny into the marriage. He wanted her out completely, and the affair to stop. But Karen and Sunny continued to see each other, and it seemed that Karen was now well and truly out of the marriage. After a few months, Craig decided the best way to put a stop to it was to move the family out of town. He started looking for a career change elsewhere that would allow this to happen. He got another job in Columbia, Missouri, one that saw him become the highest paid employee in the city. And in June 2008, the family all moved out there, hoped that things would return to normal, and as Karen and Sunny were now almost 700 miles apart, he felt confident the affair would come to an end. But it didn't. Karen and Sunny's relationship continued long distance. They would email and call and text each other, and sneak visits halfway where they could. Safe to say, Karen and Craig's marriage was now in a very bad and toxic place. For New Year's Eve, the Kahlers attended a party back in Weatherford. Many neighbors were in attendance, including Sunny. At various points during the party, some guests saw Sunny and Karen together, and it was glaringly obvious that something was going on. It had gone from being a secret between Craig, Karen, and Sunny to a very public and open thing. Craig was mortified, and a huge fight broke out between him and Karen, one that carried on as soon as they left. Karen said Craig pushed her so hard she smashed her head on the street. Friends said it was awful. The atmosphere had soured, and everyone was talking about Craig and Karen. A matter of days later, Karen told Craig she was filing for a divorce, started the legal proceedings, and moved into the spare room. Craig spent hours calling Karen's family and friends, one day asking them to convince her not to go ahead with the divorce, and the next, telling them she was leaving him for another woman, and wanted to steal all his money and take the children. Sunny started contacting Craig directly, telling him to leave Karen alone, and that she was never happy with him anyway. As March 2009 rolled around, things escalated even more, and after another fight became physical, Craig was arrested. He told police that he had hugged Karen tightly, and that she had resisted. Karen said he had violently grabbed her, giving her bruises. She gave a statement which read, "Over time, it has become apparent that Craig is controlling. I have learned along the way that he is capable of using force. The issues vary, but I figured out how to keep things from becoming ugly. When money was a problem, I wouldn't tell him what things, groceries, clothing, etc. cost. When it was about sex, I decided it was easier to give him what he wanted every night than to refuse. On occasions I would refuse. He has been known to be forceful and mean. I'm afraid it will escalate so far that someone is going to be seriously hurt." She pressed charges, and she and the children moved out of the house completely. People said this was when Craig became even more reclusive and erratic. He no longer wanted anything to do with Lauren and Emily, and only wanted to see his son Sean, saying he felt his daughters had failed him by taking their mother's side. This was made even worse when Lauren and Emily said they accepted Sunny, and were happy to see their mother happy. Craig was enraged. He referred to his daughters as rotting corpses. Friends said that he started stalking Karen and spying on her, getting into the house to install cameras, and hacking into her emails. Police were then called to the house again. When Karen found out that Craig had slashed her car tires and was ripping out cables from outside the house, Craig soon started slipping at work, choosing to show his colleagues' family albums over and over, and leaving work unannounced to see what Karen was doing. Given everything that was going on, Craig's manager Bill quietly asked him to resign in September of 2009. This had affected his focus on the department in a way that is not likely to change in the near future, his boss said. Craig was paid 2 months' salary, and 1 month of severance, and with any other job prospects looking unlikely, Craig moved back in with his parents. As they were now legally separated, he still owed Karen over $3,000 a month in child support. Flash forward to Thanksgiving 2009, and Karen, Emily, Lauren and Sunny spent the holidays at Lynn's house. 10-year-old Sean, however, spent it with Craig. But Karen wanted all her children and Sunny to visit her grandmother Dorothy during the holiday period too. So the next day she went over to pick Sean up and make the trip over. 89-year-old Dorothy lived in a quiet little farmhouse in a city of less than 1,000 people, Burlingame, Kansas. Despite Karen and Craig's many arguments and fights about the affair, a contentious pending divorce, questions about where the children would live, and issues with finances, Karen said she was hopeful that a resolution would soon be found. Craig was just days away from going to court in regards to the incident several months earlier, and a hearing had been scheduled for January to start going through the divorce. As soon as the holiday period was over, everybody was optimistic that things might start to move forward more amicably. Saturday, November 29, 2009. Deputy Sheriff Nathan Perling was finishing up some paperwork in his office when a call came in about a suspicious vehicle in Burlingame. It was just after 6 p.m., and the neighbor reported that a small truck was speeding around near their house. They had watched as the man pulled up, exited the vehicle, and started walking down the road. The couple then saw him come back, carrying a large object that they could not identify. Thinking he was stealing, they grabbed a flashlight and headed outside to confront him. He placed the object in the back seat, got back inside, and drove off just as they approached him. Deputy Perling set off to see what was going on, but just a couple of minutes later, another call came in over the radio. It was coming from the same area, but this time, it was far more alarming. No sooner had they received this harrowing call when a third person called in. They had opened their front door to find a 10-year-old child crying and asking for help. It was Sean Kahler. He said he needed help at Dorothy White's house as there had been a shooting. Officers said they knew it was going to be a bad scene, but nothing quite prepared them for what they would ultimately find. When they entered the home, the first person they found was 89-year-old Dorothy. She was bleeding profusely on the kitchen floor and had been shot several times. Was still alive, but barely. They then found Karen Kahler in the dining area. She had been shot twice, and she was already dead. 18-year-old Emily was found behind the couch in the lounge, and had also been shot twice, with the second shot likely paralyzing her instantly. She too was deceased, and police determined she was likely trying to hide as the gunman was inside. Deputy Sheriff Perling then heard a faint voice calling for help from the upstairs. It was Lauren. Just like Dorothy, she was alive, but only just. As Dorothy and Lauren were taken away, Lauren turned to an officer and said, Dorothy identified Craig as the shooter as well. Tragically, Lauren succumbed to her injuries first and was pronounced dead shortly after getting to the hospital. Dorothy was still fighting for her life, but sadly, it wasn't looking hopeful. There was one more person left who had been there, Sean, and little did the authorities realize he had witnessed a lot. Sean said he had been cleaning some old coins that he and Karen had found. As the two of them were stood at the sink, Craig entered the house via the back door, holding a rifle, and shot at Karen. Sean said he ducked down and just ran as fast as he could to get out the back door. He then ran around to the front door, hoping to get back in and get to a phone. He carefully opened the door, hearing more shots ring out as he did so. He saw Craig walking around, and he closed the door and ran for help instead. Police had already put out an alert to try and locate Craig. A resident then spotted someone abandoning their vehicle in the middle of nowhere and running down a deserted road. She called in with the tip. They found the vehicle, and it matched the description of one the neighbors had seen earlier that night, and felt confident it was Craig's. A search of the vehicle found more ammunition and some unopened anxiety medications. A backpack was also found with some soap, towels, toilet paper, cotton balls, and some canned food. But Craig was nowhere to be found. The biggest thing for me, and that I still have no answer for, is how a father can do that to his children. He literally had to chase one of his daughters through the house. Sheriff's Deputy Nathan Perling was first to arrive at one of the most horrific crimes Osage County has ever seen. Perling cautiously made his way inside to find Dorothy White covered in blood and clinging to life. He then spotted Karen Kahler on the floor in the dining room and went over to check her for a pulse. At the same time, I could hear somebody crying for help. That plea was from 16-year-old Lauren Kahler, who had been shot in an upstairs bedroom. Perling would stay by Lauren's side until paramedics arrived. In her last words, the mortally wounded teen told Perling that it was her father that opened fire. Any area, nobody would expect your neighbors something like that to happen. It's just a sad situation. The sheriff had a gun on him, and he had his hands in the air. After 8 hours of searching, Craig Kahler was finally located. It was now about 7 a.m., and he was wandering on the side of the road, looking confused, lost, and disheveled. He knew it was coming and turned to the officers and said, "I'm the guy you're looking for." He told them that he was armed with a revolver as well as some pocket knives. They also found hundreds of dollars in cash, some gloves, a flashlight, and a hunting bag. He was arrested without incident and taken to the station. Craig was fairly open and told the detectives a lot. "This doesn't look really very good, as you should well understand. And I missed it. Obviously, it's the sign connection." I said, "I'm just so happy. There's something you wanted to try. I just don't want to lose you in the process. Just be careful." I was trying to be nice. So what happened? It just became just a relationship that took over. I was having a hard time with the whole situation. He also told him about the New Year's Eve party and how the pair would sneak visits out of town. He said he was particularly upset when he realized that his daughters not only approved, but were traveling with Karen to meet Sonny as well. We were sitting together and rubbing each other's legs. I mean, just making a spectacle. I just got out of control. Things turned out a bit hysterical. Kids told me that they stayed in the hotel room. Sonny was there, obviously. Were you angry at them? I wasn't. I wasn't angry. Frustrated sometimes. Craig Kahler was charged with first-degree murder and aggravated burglary. His bail was set at $10 million. Just after 4 p.m. on December 1st, Dorothy White sadly passed away too. In December 2010, he had his preliminary trial, where he entered a plea of insanity, the only defense against capital murder. His lawyers claimed that he had had a mental breakdown due to Karen's affair. They said this, coupled with the loss of his job and having to move in with his parents, had only added fuel to the fire. They said that the unopened medication in his car, ongoing erratic behavior, and the fact he did not attempt to cover up what he had done, was evidence that he was not of a sound state of mind. Thus his plea of insanity was fair. In 1995, the state of Kansas passed a law which revoked the traditional insanity defense. The new law stated that defendants could no longer argue that because of mental health issues, they were incapable of deciding right from wrong. Instead, defendants suffering from mental health issues were still legally responsible for a crime, unless these mental health issues prevented them from forming an intent to commit or act with premeditation. His defense team argued that his mental health issues were so severe that it proved he had not premeditated anything. It was a total snap in that moment. At the time of the murders, his lawyers said that he was suffering from depression, hallucinations, and had obsessive-compulsive, narcissistic, and histrionic personality disorders. But the prosecution argued that it was definitely premeditated, and his behavior over the last year especially showed that this was all just building up to what he ultimately wanted to do, which was kill his wife and likely anyone else that stood in the way of that. Their expert psychiatrist stated that while Craig had clinical depression, he was still capable of planning the murders. They also pointed to the fact that Craig had not killed their son Sean, even though he was stood right there, showing this was a conscious decision. This was not someone that was out of control and had snapped in the moment. And after this, they brought in their star witness, Sean Kahler, who is now 12 years old. And one can only imagine how difficult this must have been for him. He appeared via a video link to bravely tell everybody what had happened. People in the court said that Sean was clear, concise, and unwavering, a child far more mature than his years. My dad came through the door and shot my mom. I just heard her collapse on the floor from the shot. I just caught a glimpse. I think she was holding her leg, Sean recalled. Some people in the courtroom said that the pictures of the crime scene were so bad, they physically had to look away, with some even crying. The prosecution spoke about the many allegations of abuse and controlling behaviors, and said this, again, proved his intention to hurt was always there. And when he finally lost complete control when they all moved out, is when things escalated even more. Sunny Reese also testified. She described Karen and Craig's relationship as very abusive, saying she wanted to protect Karen from him. She also said that Craig was more than happy for her and Karen to start a relationship and showed no signs of being bothered by it, until he had to let Karen go. But she acknowledged that she had no physical evidence to prove this. It was all what she remembered and what she had heard from Karen. On August 25, 2011, after just 2 hours, the jury had reached a unanimous verdict. Craig Kahler was found guilty of capital murder, and his pleas of insanity were not believed. This meant he would face the death penalty or life without parole. There were many victim impact statements given. Sean gave a small statement too, and said, "I do not want my dad to receive the death penalty because it would be hard on my grandparents. I do not want my whole family gone." After this, another week would pass while everyone waited to hear the results of the sentencing. Kahler showed no emotion today as he heard his fate. The execution sentence comes as retribution for the shooting deaths of 4 family members. Court at this time sentences the defendant for the crime of capital murder to death. James Craig Kahler opted not to speak on his own behalf, and even asked if he could leave the room to avoid hearing the victim impact statements. Chief Judge Phillip ordered him to stay. "I loved Grandma White, Karen, Emily, and Lauren very much. I will miss them until the end of my days." Lynn Denton spoke of her grandmother, her 2 nieces, and her sister. "I still replay that frightening night over and over in my mind, just like watching an old movie reel. When I get to the ending, I try so hard to rewrite it. There's no such option." That statement, read by a representative for the Attorney General's office, came from Karen's mom, who's also Dorothy's daughter, of course, and Lauren and Emily's grandmother, a woman who saw 3 generations of her family wiped out in just one day. Kahler's attorneys say they will file a motion to withdraw that death sentence, and Kahler will be appointed an attorney for his automatic appeal to the Kansas Supreme Court. Lad Egan, KRCG News, now back to you. Upon hearing he was sentenced to death, those in the courtroom said Craig Kahler had no reaction, no remorse, no sadness, and no regret. The prosecutor said he only ever seemed to look proud of himself, often smirking and muttering sarcastic comments. As he exited the courtroom to begin his time, he shouted to his mother and father, "Take care of Sean so he's not raised by a bunch of freaks." While on death row, Craig started writing letters to various people, including the lead prosecutor. He still showed no remorse, instead saying he felt a sense of relief for what had happened, as he was able to free Sean. His team appealed to the Kansas Supreme Court, citing numerous complaints, including the belief that there had been misconduct on the jury. They also stated that his mental health and insanity plea had not been taken into consideration. One judge said Kansas, unlike many states, will not wholly exonerate a defendant on the ground that his illness prevented him from recognizing his criminal act as morally wrong. Another judge added that contrary to Kahler's view, Kansas takes account of mental health at both trial and sentencing. It has just not adopted the particular insanity defense Kahler would like. His appeal was denied. With this ruling, Craig Kahler had now exhausted his direct appeals. But further appeals were still possible, and in January 2023, another appeal was lodged, which might be his last chance. Lynn and Sonny started organized runs in Weatherford in honor of Karen to raise money for victims of domestic violence, and the community often comes together to remember the family and all the lives that were lost that night. According to sources, Sean went into the care of the state for a while before going to live with his grandmother and grandfather. He graduated high school and now works in Kansas. It was a case that left the community shocked and hurting, 3 generations snatched away in a matter of minutes. And for Sean, not only lost his mother, sisters, and great-grandmother in the most awful way, but witnessed it all as well, and then essentially lost his father too. It is incomprehensibly heartbreaking. How he has come through it all despite everything is remarkable, and a testament to his strength and perseverance against so many odds. Story 2. In this age, it seems we're more fascinated and interested in true crime, real-life cases, and criminology than ever before. Dark tourism is an industry making millions around the world. From Jack the Ripper tours to Alcatraz, people will travel far and wide for a look into the world of the gruesome and morbid. But why? What attracts people to these places? What impact do they have? And what are some of the issues surrounding this industry? In the new book, 50 Dark Destinations, leading experts in the field of criminology, history, and psychology examine the background, questions, and issues surrounding the world of dark tourism. By looking at 50 places from around the globe, criminology is made digestible and accessible and makes you think about this industry in a whole new way. 50 Dark Destinations provides a fascinating and captivating insight into the world of deviance-related tourism and brings the debates around the industry to the forefront. We are also very excited that our wonderful viewers can get 30% off between now and June with our code POFDD23 if you purchase the book from the publisher's website. That's code POFDD23 for 30% off when you buy the book from the publisher's website. Or you can follow the direct link in our description box below. 47-year-old Lindsay Baybeck was a loving mother of 2. She lived in Huncote, a village on the outskirts of Accrington, Lancashire in the United Kingdom. During a night out when she was in her early 20s, she met the man she would later marry, Tim Baybeck. He said that she was stunning and immediately caught his eye. After 3 years of dating, the pair were married, and less than 2 years later, they welcomed their first child, a son, Stephen, and their daughter Sarah followed 2 years later. Lindsay worked at a local primary school as a teaching assistant, using her passion for helping people by working with children with additional learning needs. She loved children and would do anything for her students, using her artistic talents to create sets and props for the school plays. Lindsay was also very athletic, so long country walks were a huge part of her life. After being married for 20 years, Lindsay and Tim began to drift apart, and after realizing they had different goals and dreams, the pair decided to separate and divorce. But the divorce was very amicable, and the pair remained on good terms. If one needed the other, they would be there to help. Lindsay moved into a house on Burnley Road in Accrington and started a new relationship. Tim would also start seeing someone else too. August 12, 2019, Lindsay and her daughter Sarah went out for a day of shopping at the mall in Blackburn. Sarah had just finished her GCSEs and wanted to buy some new things for her college course. They did some shopping before going to an Asda supermarket, and after a while the pair said their goodbyes and Lindsay dropped her daughter off at around 3 p.m. In the evening, she was due to have food with Sarah and Sarah's boyfriend at 6. Lindsay said she would see them then and told Sarah she loved her. As the couple traveled over to Lindsay's, they were confused to find that she wasn't there and the door was locked. Sarah hadn't taken her key, as she assumed her mother would be there to let her in. They knocked, but there was no response. They sat and waited, and as time ticked by with still no sign of her, they became increasingly concerned. Sarah tried to get in touch with her mother with calls and text messages, but her phone appeared to be off. The messages didn't deliver, and there was no reply. She called her father and asked him to pick them up, explaining that Lindsay's car was still parked outside and her phone had been turned off. They ran through the various possibilities. Had she run into friends and become sidetracked? Had she lost track of time? But this was so unlike Lindsay, and Sarah said she would never just not turn up. Sarah sent a message to Lindsay's best friend, Sharon, asking if she knew where she was. Sharon said that she hadn't heard from her either, and her messages also didn't deliver to Lindsay's phone. She then went back to her father's house, and they went back with a set of keys to let themselves inside. Nothing seemed out of place. After calling out into the house, there was no response. Just silence. They knew they needed to contact the police. So just after midnight, Tim called them. "Lancashire Police, how can I help?" "Help me, it's why Lindsay's gone missing." He told the operator that this was not like her, and she had never done anything like this before. A police officer was dispatched. When it became clear that she definitely wasn't there, a major missing persons investigation was launched. As this was so out of character, Lindsay was classified as a high-risk missing person. Tim was questioned about his movements that day, but he was quickly accounted for and had a watertight alibi. They needed to piece together her last known movements. Lindsay had been captured on CCTV heading down Burnley Road. She had taken her phone and her keys with her. As she loved to stay active, she had decided to go for a walk in a local area called the Coppice, a place that she would often go to, made up of woodlands and footpaths. The authorities were concerned that maybe she had fallen and injured herself, leaving her unable to get help. Lancashire Police utilized a helicopter and drone, and worked alongside the Fire and Rescue Service and the Mountain Rescue Service to try and find her. Hundreds of people from the local community came out to help. Missing persons posters were put up, and a Facebook group garnered more than 10,000 members. People from all walks of life had joined in the search, from seasoned walkers to parents with pushchairs. Everybody was desperate to find her. A dog walker would soon make a discovery. A red garment was found hanging on a fence. Lindsay's jacket had a red lining to it. As the search efforts continued, there was still no sign of Lindsay Bubeck. And as the days continued to pass, hope was quickly fading that they would find her alive. In a press conference 4 days after her disappearance, Detective Chief Inspector Alan Davies said that significant searches had been carried out and asked for anyone who had been in the Coppice at around 4:30 p.m. on the day Lindsay had last been seen to come forward. That evening, hundreds responded to a call on social media to take part in a search for Lindsay, with her friends saying the support from the community had moved them to tears. One of the co-organizers said, "The community spirit is just amazing, and we will not stop until she is found." The searches were split into teams of 20, with a map of the area put up at the base. Each group would mark off what had been searched, and they would look through every inch of their assigned areas. Detective Inspector Tim McDermott said the police were overwhelmed by the support and dedication shown by members of the public. It had now been a week since Lindsay had gone missing. Teams were deployed to search the rivers, and more people continued to come out and join the hunt. August 24, 2019. The police received a call. A man had been walking his dog in Accrington Cemetery when it went into a wooded area. He had called for his dog to come back to him, but the dog didn't respond. It was fixated by something on the ground it was sniffing. The dog walker said, "I walked further forward and stood on something soft and squishy. I immediately jumped back and grabbed my dog by the collar. I then smelt a horrible smell. It smelt rotten, and there were flies around it. I could see plastic and what looked like a leg." 12 days after she had been reported missing, the search for Lindsay Bubeck came to an end. There in Accrington Cemetery, her body was found. Lindsay's naked body had been wrapped in plastic and put into a makeshift grave, with dirt from around the cemetery put on top of her in an attempt to conceal it. When the knock came at the door late that night, Sarah said she knew instantly it was not the good news they were hoping for. Following the discovery, Detective Superintendent Andy Cribben of Lancashire Police gave a statement. At about 8 o'clock on Saturday evening, we received a call from the ambulance public, and police officers and detectives attended Accrington Cemetery. There, sadly, we found the body of a woman, and as a result of our investigations regarding that, we've now launched a murder investigation. Whilst we've yet to formally identify the body, we believe at this stage it is Lindsay, and we have informed the family of all the developments, and family liaison officers are with them. So I'm asking if anybody was in the area at that time, please contact us. If anybody has seen Lindsay on that date or since again, please contact us and let us know. And if you have any CCTV within the area of Burley Road and Peel Park Avenue, again, please contact us. And then with regards to Accrington Cemetery, anybody within the last 2 to 3 weeks who's seen any suspicious activity or anything untoward within the cemetery or the surrounding area, or if you've got any CCTV that covers the area of the cemetery, again, please contact us to help us understand what's gone on and try and identify who and what is involved in the death of this lady. We've got a number of specialist officers and forensic teams working at the scene to try and give us as much information now to understand what's happened, when it happened, and who was involved. We've got a significant number of detectives and police officers and staff working on this investigation, and will continue to do so in order to bring justice and understand what's happened. As news of the discovery began to spread, flowers were left in tribute to Lindsay, as those who had spent so much time looking for her were now faced with the heartbreaking truth. One card said that even though they didn't know Lindsay, she had touched their heart. A vigil was also held in nearby Peel Park, where a minute's silence took place, and a choir sang Amazing Grace. The local church was packed out as people headed there to light candles for her. Flowers were also laid outside her school. Lindsay's ex-husband Tim said he was broken by the news and devastated watching his children lose their mother in such horrendous circumstances. Home Office pathologist Dr. Naomi Carter carried out the post-mortem. Lindsay had died from severe neck injuries. Dr. Carter said in her 25-year career, she had never seen such extensive crushing damage to an entire larynx, saying it had the same severity as one would expect to see in an industrial accident. Due to the state of decomposition, she had to be identified using dental records, and also as a result of the decomposition process, no evidence of sexual violence or assault could be found. There had also been an attempt to saw off one of her legs. The police were now in a race against time to catch her killer, and the local community was in fear that someone else would soon fall victim. The following day, August 25th, a crime scene investigation team descended on the cemetery to conduct their inquiries. They found a pair of gloves and a saw close to the grave, and tests on them came back positive for blood. Lindsay's shoes were found in a skip, wrapped in a blue plastic bag with the saws cut off. They were able to get a DNA profile, and it belonged to a male. The gloves also had a male DNA profile on the inside, and Lindsay's DNA was on the outside. The rest of her clothes have never been recovered. The police needed to establish exactly how her body had come to be in the cemetery. Between her body and the plastic she had been wrapped in were bits of grass and a leaf. The police had a botanist come in to examine the foliage. They were able to determine that the grass in between her body and the plastic had not come from inside the cemetery, meaning she had been murdered elsewhere. The exact location of her murder has not been established, but it's believed it most likely happened in the coppice, just minutes after she left her home. One object would soon blow the case wide open. In the cemetery was a blue wheelie bin. Several people had seen the blue wheelie bin during the searches, with one person even reporting it to the police. But at that time she was still considered a missing person, and there was no evidence to suggest that she had come to any harm. So the police said there was no evidence to link it to her disappearance, and it was left where it was, with nobody realizing its significance. Then, an officer reviewing the CCTV footage came across something that immediately stood out. A young male wearing a gray tracksuit was filmed pulling a blue wheelie bin along Burnley Road at 2:30 p.m. before he turned onto Whitewall Road and headed into the cemetery. It had been filmed on August 17th, 5 days after Lindsay had last been seen. The police were cautious about releasing the footage initially. They knew they needed to find this person in quickly, but if he wasn't involved, releasing the footage could put him at risk. They decided to spend the next 24 hours trying to find him through the police databases throughout the country, but they came back with nothing. As they were trying to find him, a witness came forward. A woman had been on the coppice at the same time as Lindsay. She had a very worrying story to tell. I looked to my left and saw a lone male figure on a path that runs parallel to the path that I am on. There was a lot of foliage. I didn't have a clear view of him at that point. I decided whatever route he went, I would take another route. From the first time I saw him, I was wary of him. He looked out of place in the woods. He was in front of me. He was walking very slowly. I didn't want to be in front of him. I wanted to be able to see him at all times. I slowed down so I could be behind him. As she grew even more concerned, she picked up her pace and began to look around for something heavy that she could use to defend herself if needed. She told the police in her statement, "While I can't say what his original pace was at that point, what I can say for sure is that as I turned my head to glance at him, he pulled up short, almost startled when I turned to look. I didn't look back again. I just daren't. I never saw him again. She was filmed coming out of the coppice. The path that she had taken would be the same one Lindsay would take. She couldn't do a formal identification, but her description matched the person from the CCTV footage. On the 27th of August, the police decided to release the CCTV footage and issued an appeal for anyone who recognized him to come forward. The footage quickly made the national news. The footage of a man who they are treating as a suspect in the hunt for the killer of mother of two Lindsay Bubeck. The video shows the man walking down Burnley Road towards Accrington at 2:30 on August 17th. That's 5 days after Lindsay went missing. Her body was found at a cemetery in Accrington on Saturday. Then Lindsay and Tim Stephen received a phone call from one of his friends. His friend said he recognized the male, and they went to the same gym. Soon, the police would get the break they had been hoping for. After seeing the appeal for information, a mother and father brought their son to Green Bank Police Station the same day the footage was released to the public. Their son was just 16 years old. Rocky Marciano Price was subsequently taken into custody. He was the same person that Stephen's friend had mentioned. A ban on reporting his name and any details about him was initially put in place to protect his identity, but this would later be lifted. When his home was searched, the same plastic that had been used to wrap Lindsay's body was found, and tracksuits from CCTV footage were found too. His DNA was a match to the items in the cemetery containing the male DNA profile. But who exactly was this 16-year-old suspected murderer? Rocky Marciano Price lived on Windhill Road with his parents and 5 siblings. He had an IQ of 65 and learning difficulties, including autism and ADHD. He was a student at a school for those who were unable to remain in the mainstream school system, where his teachers described him as very quiet, pretty much nonverbal most of the time. He avoided conversation unless it was something he wanted to talk about, like the chickens on his family farm that he helped to care for. He often went to the gym and spent his free time watching films and playing video games. He was assessed in 2015, and a psychologist concluded that he had a limited understanding of his own emotions and his own emotional well-being, and appeared to have little insight into the connection between events and emotions. A report completed the following year described him as having no stranger awareness and needing supervision outside. The police were able to trace his movements that day. At around 2:30 p.m. on the day of Lindsay's death, he had headed into the coppice, and Lindsay did the same at around 4 o'clock. Within a couple of hours, Price had left the coppice and walked down Burnley Road. It appeared that his tracksuit top was partially unzipped, and his tracksuit bottom's cord was untied. He also appeared to have wet knees. Price had gone back to the body twice on the 12th of August. At 6:55 p.m., CCTV captured him carrying a black rucksack. He then left the coppice with the rucksack, before returning with the wheelie bin. A witness saw him at 8:28 p.m., pulling a bin that sounded empty. He would then return to the grave a further 2 times. Throughout his 11 interviews over 3 days, his answer to everything was no comment. But later, he had a prepared statement. It read in part as follows: "I am not involved in Lindsay Bubeck's murder. However, I was approached by a white male who speaks English, who offered me a large sum of money to move the body. I have not met this man before. I have not met him since, nor have I had any contact with him. He has not paid me any money. He told me that he would leave the money for me near where the body had been at first, once everything was clear. I cannot describe the man other than to say he was white, male, spoke English. I could not see his face while as he was covering it with his hood. I am not sure of his height, build, or age." Detectives scoured the CCTV footage to try and find if there was any evidence of this white male being in the coppice, but they could find none. On the 31st of August, was charged with murder. Her devastated family said they were emotionally exhausted and completely and utterly numb. On Monday, September 2nd, Price appeared at Blackburn Magistrates Court before the case was sent to be heard at Preston Crown Court the next day. He pleaded guilty to moving and hiding her body, but he entered a plea of not guilty to the charge of murder. On September 20th, Lindsay Bubeck's funeral was held at St. Margaret's Church, with more than 200 in attendance. An obituary read, "Lindsay was the most amazing mom. She doted on her children and always gave her all to ensure that their life was fun and filled with laughter." The road was closed off as her coffin was taken into the church, and the community came out in their droves to say goodbye and to show support for her family and loved ones. Rocky Price's trial was set for the 25th of February, 2020, with Mrs. Justice Yip presiding. As the trial got underway, several problems caused difficulties. The trial didn't take place for 2 days in the second week, as the judge had other commitments that she had to attend to. Problems with the power and the heating forced the court to end early on Wednesday, and then they were sent home at lunchtime on Thursday when the prosecution rested their case. But just a few days later, there would be a shocking turn of events that nobody had been prepared for. The defense made an application to discharge the jury and have a retrial. This was before they had made their case. Meetings were held between the defense, the judge, and the prosecution. On the 9th of March, the court reconvened without the jury. The judge placed strict reporting restrictions on the matter, but the problems at hand would later come to light. That day, the court was told that 2 men, ages 22 and 23, and a 22-year-old woman, had been arrested for a separate offense of the false imprisonment of a young man. This was not related to Lindsay's case, and the parties involved were not connected to Rocky Price or the wider inquiry. A video found on the phone of one of those who had been detained purported to show a man discussing aspects of the Birkbeck case, and saying he had been involved in the murder and the disposal of the body. David McLaughlin, QC for the prosecution, said that the video was neither consistent with the facts of the case nor with the defense put forward by the defendant, but added it was clearly something that had to be fully investigated to ensure the defendant could have a fair trial. Lancashire Constabulary examined the footage over the following 5 days, and officers were part of the inquiry. Following this, they were satisfied that this apparent confession was false. David McLaughlin agreed that the extensive nature of the inquiries required proper consideration by the defense, and this could not be done in a realistic time scale for the first trial to continue. He added that in his 30-year career as a lawyer, he had only ever dealt with a situation like this once, and referred to the matter as almost uncharted territory. On the 10th of March, the jury was officially discharged and the trial against him collapsed. Price was remanded in custody, and a new trial date was set for June 15th. There now follows a ministerial broadcast from the Prime Minister. From this evening, I must give the British people a very simple instruction. You must stay at home because the critical, when COVID hit and lockdown orders were issued, the trial was pushed back again, this time to the 3rd of August. Finally, the new trial commenced. His story that he had been offered money by an anonymous man to move the body was dismissed by the prosecution as implausible fiction. The woman who had given the statement to the police saying that she had been followed by a male on the coppice was not able to formally identify Price in court, but the DNA could link him to Lindsay through various bits of evidence. His DNA was on her trainers, and her DNA was on the outside of the gloves, and his DNA was on the inside of them. Both of them could be linked to the wheelie bin. The state of decomposition suggested that she had been stored upside down in the wheelie bin before being taken to the cemetery. He sat slouched in the dock with his hands in his pockets, with Sarah saying he showed no respect for anybody in the court. As the trial continued, the horrifying details were laid bare. The brutal nature of her death and the injuries that she had sustained shocked the court, and coverage of the trial made national news. After the defense and prosecution had rested their cases, it was now time for the jury to deliberate. August 12, 2020, 1 year to the day since Lindsay had been murdered. After just 3 hours of deliberations, the jury had reached their verdict. DSI Cribben described the atmosphere in court. It's an atmosphere like none I've ever experienced before at any murder trial. Rocky Marciano Price was unanimously found guilty of murder. Mrs. Justice Yip said the killing had been significantly premeditated, saying, "He lay in wait on the coppice near to Lindsay's home. The only conclusion I can draw is he was looking for a woman to kill. I don't know what was on his mind at the time. The attack was swift and brutal. The murder of a stranger in broad daylight with no rational explanation is horrifying to all members of society. The random nature of the killing shows the defendant presents a very real risk to members of the public. I have no doubt he knew what he was doing and knew it was terribly wrong. The stalking of another woman also demonstrates this did not arise out of a sudden loss of control or heat of the moment. He persisted with his plan to target a lone woman. It shows he had the capacity to plan and reason. When deciding on her sentence, she decided she would take into account his lack of previous criminal convictions, what was referred to as his immaturity, and that he was likely to have challenges while in prison. Price was not in court for the sentencing and appeared via a video link. He was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum term of 16 years. Due to his age, the minimum term was 12 years. But as there was an element of premeditation, he received 16. He showed no reaction as his sentence was handed down. Following his sentence, members of his family wore shirts saying, "Wrongly convicted, free this boy." The back of the shirt said, "Murder is still at large." His father said, "Our son is innocent. He has not got the mental capacity to hurt anyone. We are not going to stop fighting if it takes us all our lives to find this other man." In spite of the evidence, there are those that do not believe he is responsible. A group of around 30 marched in protest against his conviction, again arguing that the guilty verdict was wrong. A petition was created on change.org, arguing that he had been wrongfully convicted, and rumors were even spread that Tim was responsible. Tim said, "The police kept saying to me, 'Just ignore them, Tim, and they'll go away.' But they do chip away at you. It does hurt you. We've been through absolute hell regarding this. Then you've got to deal with these people who are pointing fingers. It's despicable. I just want people to understand there's still a family picking up the pieces and trying to rebuild." After Price was sentenced, DSI Cribben gave a statement outside court. Throughout the investigation and the trial, the defendant relied on a lie, trying to pass the blame onto an unknown man who in reality did not exist. Lancashire police conducted a meticulous and open-minded investigation. In the end, the evidence was clear. The defendant acted alone. He showed no remorse whatsoever for taking Lindsay's life, for his actions in hiding and burying her body, or for the subsequent devastation that he has caused with the lives of those who loved her. When Lindsay went missing, the outpouring of support from people of activity and elsewhere was overwhelming. For days on end, people assisted with searching, provided CCTV and statements. Their reaction shows how loved and respected Lindsay was by so many people, and how willing the community was to pull together in such a terrible situation. On behalf of Lindsay's family and Lancashire Police, I would like to thank all those people for all of their help and all of their well wishes. Lindsay's devastated family said, "Our lives have been utterly destroyed by the evil, cowardly behavior of the defendant and the horrific manner in which she was murdered. It has left a huge void in our lives that will never be filled. This callous act has destroyed our lives forever. Our family needs time to reflect and grieve for Lindsay, and to try and rebuild our shattered lives." Lindsay Bubeck was a woman who touched the lives of many, from the students she worked with to the friends that she made. She devoted her life to helping young people who needed extra support and would always put others before herself. The way in which the community rallied together to try and find her was inspiring, but for those left in the wake of such an appalling crime, life will never be the same. Story 3. This is the case of Bethany and Decker. Today's episode takes us to Ashburn in Virginia, home to 21-year-old Bethany and Decker. Bethany's mother Kim said her daughter was just simply a joy to be around, always upbeat, and had been smiling since the day she was born. She had 2 younger siblings who said she was the leader of the pack, confident, encouraging, and supportive. After years of excelling in school, she was accepted into George Mason University, hoping to gain a degree in global and economic change. One of her roommates said she could put off an essay until the night before, write it in an hour, and come out with an A-star. She was very intelligent, she recalled. It was in her freshman year that Bethany met Emil Decker, a cadet in the Reserve Officers Training Corps, who was set to join the Army National Guard. Emil was a hopeless romantic, and Bethany's family said she could mention the smallest, most seemingly insignificant thing just once, and he would remember it, and try and act on it. Bethany's family adored him, and he fit right in, as if they'd been together their whole lives. After a couple of years of dating, Emil proposed. No sooner had they got engaged, Bethany found out she was pregnant. The young couple were so excited to start their family and life together, and although the baby had come sooner than maybe planned, the pregnancy was a welcome surprise. They called their baby boy Kai. Although family and friends said the stress of a newborn baby on top of having little money to support them soon set in. While Emil started training with the Army National Guard units, Bethany, who was still studying at George Mason, took up a part-time job in a restaurant to get some more money. The stress only mounted further when Emil started prepping to be deployed to Afghanistan. Between both their families helping out, the pair were just about coping. But knowing Emil would soon be away for long periods of time was hard for Bethany to deal with. She said she felt like the pair were drifting apart, and they were living in 2 completely separate worlds. She told Emil she worried they had rushed into things and should have taken more time to plan. Some sources say at this point, they decided to try a separation and take a break. Emil was upset, but wanted to give Bethany what she needed. As he left the country, Bethany moved into a new apartment, so she could be closer to her job and pick up as many shifts as possible. One day at the restaurant, things would take a massive shift, which changed the course of everything. Bethany met 31-year-old Ronald Roldan, who was originally from Bolivia. Before long, the pair were involved in a romantic relationship. Bethany told friends she was lonely and isolated, with Emil being overseas for such long periods of time. And despite her friends' reservations, Ronald soon moved into Bethany's apartment. Her best friend Sarah said she was shocked and warned her against it, but she ultimately wanted to see Bethany happy, and Bethany was going to do what she wanted to anyway. She and Emil were still separated and communication was dwindling, but he could sense something was going on. The relationship with Ronald was bad from the get-go. He was controlling, jealous, and violent, and everyone saw it in him. Kim said she was frightened, hearing horror stories about what was going on inside the apartment. She even suspected that Ronald had hurt Kai, as Kai not only seemed scared of him, but he had a black eye on one occasion. The story they were told was that a friend was watching him, and he fell backwards off of a chair. But Bethany's family were not so sure. They also found out that Ronald had phoned Kai's daycare and pretended to be Emil. Fortunately, the daycare could tell something was wrong and nothing happened, but this resulted in them setting up a code to use over the phone, so they knew not to answer to Ronald if he called again. Ronald would text and call constantly, asking to see proof of where she was and who she was with. He would even follow her to houses she said she was going to, just to make sure she actually was. And then he would sit and wait for her outside until she left. Bethany was now in a very bad situation and decided to come clean and tell Emil everything, saying she knew she had made a mistake. Emil still wanted to make things work, saying his family was his priority. He said he could tell that something had been wrong for many months, as she was now working about 6 days a week and barely talking to him, and when she did communicate, she was distant and not present. Bethany and Emil decided to go on holiday. When he was home on leave to try and patch things up, their marriage was hanging by a thread at this point, and the situation was messy to say the least. She was telling her mother and friends that the situation with Ronald was now so bad, she needed to either get him out somehow or leave the apartment herself in secret. She and Kim started working on a plan to make this happen. As 2010 came to an end, Emil sent a sweet message to his young family. In mid-January 2011, he was granted leave, and the pair decided they would still go on holiday together. As Bethany met him at the airport, it was clear there was another issue to contend with. Bethany was pregnant again, and Ronald was the father. Emil said he wasn't angry and still wanted the holiday in Hawaii to go ahead. He said, "I had been overseas, and it was a completely different world. Coming back to the United States, I was just happy to be home, to be alive, to be with my family, that anything else in the whole entire world really did not matter to me at all. It was definitely a make or break trip, and by all accounts they did have a lovely time in Hawaii. It was the most they'd seen each other, laughed together, and just talked in ages. It felt like things could start to get back on track." When Emil and Bethany got back on the 28th of January, Bethany visited her grandma. They had a nice afternoon making pizza and talking about the trip, but her grandma said she could tell there were more stories than Bethany was sharing. She was so young with so much going on, and everything was clearly getting on top of her. Bethany later confided that she was drowning in stress, guilt, and sadness, and it was the lowest she had felt in her whole life. Later that night, joined them for dinner, where the crisis talks continued. Without warning, Bethany's phone started to go off. She grabbed her things and rushed out, saying they didn't understand what was going to happen to her if she didn't go home. Emil was due back in just a few days, and although the break had been good for them, it still wasn't clear how things would be once he left. Bethany drove back to her apartment as Emil packed up, ready to fly out on the 2nd of February. The plan was she would meet him at the airport to see him off, telling him, "I will always be there no matter what." On February 2nd, Emil arrived at the airport hoping to see Bethany there, but she didn't turn up. He called her, and they said she hadn't been into work for the last few days. Before he boarded, he called around Bethany's family to give them the heads up that something seemed wrong. Regardless of any issues the pair ever had, Bethany was always at the airport to see him go. Over the next few days, friends and family tried to make contact with Bethany, but she didn't answer her phone once. Bethany's mother Kim then received a few strange phone calls which remained undisclosed, and Bethany's friend Sarah got some Facebook messages that stood out immediately. She logged in and saw that Bethany was online. Having not heard from her in a while, she started up a chat in Messenger. She said she knew right away. It was not Bethany sending the messages back. The English was broken, words were misspelled, and basic things she would have been able to answer she couldn't. Sarah called Kim and told her suspicions. Emil also got an email from Bethany's account, and he too said he didn't believe his wife had typed it. By this point, Kim had received messages from 4 different people, all saying they thought Bethany's Facebook account had been hacked into. Bethany's grandparents lived closer to Bethany than Kim. They decided to drive over to her complex. They found Bethany's car parked outside. It was at an odd angle with a flat tire. This was even more odd because no one had seen her car there before this point. It seemed to have appeared out of nowhere. They knocked on the door, but the silence was deafening. They called 911 on February 19th and reported her missing. Bethany's family said it was not unusual for her to go several days without talking to anyone or replying, and before they all knew it, it was 3 weeks later. Given the fact she hadn't seen or spoken to anyone during this time, as well as being pregnant, authorities did not miss a beat and moved quickly, concerned they had already lost a lot of time. A quick search of her phone, credit and debit cards showed they had not been accessed since January 29th. She hadn't shown up to any of her classes, she hadn't checked herself into any of the nearby hospitals, she hadn't gone into work, and given the fact her passport was at home, she hadn't left the country either. When police went to her apartment, they determined there were no signs of any forced entry or a struggle, and nothing appeared to be glaringly out of place. Her belongings were all still there, indicating she hadn't packed up to go anywhere either. There was nothing inside her car that indicated foul play or pointed to where she might have gone. It was now the first week of March, and detectives decided to hold a press conference. Divers were searching the waters, canine units were around the fields, and the FBI were brought in too. Police were getting leads, but they were going nowhere. None of these tips came to anything. It seemed that the last person to have seen Bethany, given the timeline they knew, was Emil. He was granted permission to fly home and help with the investigation. He voluntarily took a polygraph test and underwent hours of interrogation, answering everything twice over, and was completely supportive of everything the police needed. He said he had absolutely nothing to do with Bethany being missing, and even despite all their issues, his mind was racing, and was deeply concerned. He said he understood why he was being looked at so closely. He happened to leave the country around the same time she went missing, and had just found out she was pregnant with another man's child. But he said he let the police ask everything they needed to, no matter how painful the questions were, so they could rule him out and he could start helping. All of his movements in between the 28th of January and the 2nd of February were all accounted for as well. Authorities had to consider the possibility that given all of her stresses, she had just wanted a total break and had dipped off the radar. But going this long without talking to her mother and grandmother, and without seeing Kai, was definitely not the Bethany they knew. The police were still treating her disappearance as a missing persons case, and not anything more sinister. They didn't identify anyone as a suspect, calling it premature, and saying they wanted to encourage the public to keep looking for her, without putting anything into their heads. There was, however, one more person they needed to talk to, Ronald Roldan. He was no longer living in the apartment, and they had found him at his parents' house. He told them he had moved out recently, as the relationship had come to an end. His story actually informed the detectives that he was the last person to see her. Whereas Emil had last seen her on the 28th of January, Ronald said he saw her on the afternoon of January the 29th. He said she was in the apartment, and she seemed her usual self. This was partly corroborated by the manager, who said that she had called in just after 2 p.m. on January 29th to get her next shifts for the week. She also confirmed her shift for that night, but she never showed up to work it. Ronald said he hadn't reported her disappearance, as now the relationship was over. He naturally just hadn't had any communication with her to even realize she was missing. ATM records showed that he left Bethany's apartment the afternoon she was last seen, and made a withdrawal from his bank at 4:26 p.m. He then returned to the apartment after getting a text from his ex-girlfriend Danielle, with whom he shared 2 children. Ronald sent 2 messages to Bethany, one at 4:01 p.m. and one at 4:31 p.m., to tell her he would be staying with his children at their apartment. But it was confirmed that after Bethany contacted work at 02:08 p.m., her phone had no activity. Whether these messages were received is still unknown, but it appeared he had been trying to get hold of her. Danielle said she did drop the children with him at about 4:30 p.m., and Ronald told her he wasn't sure if Bethany would be coming back, as the couple had had a fight and she'd taken off. When Danielle returned a few days later, Ronald told her he hadn't seen or heard from Bethany since that day. A search warrant was now issued for his apartment, but this turned up nothing. His computer, phone, and hard drives were all seized, but they drew a blank here as well. A quick background check on Ronald found he did have history with the police, but at this point there was absolutely nothing to link him to Bethany's disappearance. Given the fact that detectives now knew he was the last person to see her, he was considered a person of interest, but not a suspect. Bethany's story was now national news, made even more intriguing for journalists, when it got out that she had been married to a man that they had interviewed, and was having a baby with another man who was now a potential person of interest. May 2011 would be the month Bethany was due to give birth, and detectives issued another press release, contacting hospitals to see if she had checked in anywhere. Again, they were met with silence. The months would soon turn into years, and time was slipping by. Police were still no further forward than when they had started, but in May 2012 a new detective was assigned to the case, and the family said they were hopefully fresh eyes that could help them. On this particular year, what would have been Bethany's 23rd birthday coincided with Mother's Day, and family and friends gathered to spread awareness and share stories. Emil and Kai were also in attendance. Kim even connected with the Harrington family, who lost their daughter Morgan in 2009, a case we actually covered on the channel a while ago. They cut a big cake for Bethany, made in her favorite color, orange. In late 2012, Investigation Discovery aired an episode of their show Disappeared, dedicated to Bethany's case, which gave it more attention, but still no answers. As time continued to pass, the tips and leads became few and far between, and focuses on other investigations had to take priority. Emil eventually filed for divorce from Bethany, and was given sole custody of their son Kai. Everything remained pretty quiet until November 2014, when a completely separate 911 call would shine a whole new light on the case. On the 12th of November 2014, police in North Carolina responded to a shocking call. It was almost 2 a.m., and it appeared to be a very serious domestic incident. A woman called Vicky said she had shot her boyfriend twice in self-defense when he had attacked her. Out of nowhere, he had walked up behind her, grabbed her by her hair, and snapped her neck, breaking it in 2 places. He then started punching and biting her. Despite being in what must have been immense pain, Vicky managed to grab her gun and shoot him twice. He then snatched the gun off her and shot her 3 times, once in the head. She still managed to crawl out of the house, all the way to a neighbor's home. Her neighbor locked the doors, grabbed his gun, and called 911. Vicky's boyfriend was none other than Ronald Roldan. He was arrested and charged with attempted murder, although much to Vicky's anger, the attempted murder charge was dropped as he entered a plea deal. He was sentenced to a minimum of 6 years, and after completing his sentence, he was scheduled to be transferred into the custody of U.S. Immigrations and Customs Enforcement, who would start the process of deporting him back to Bolivia. Vicky told authorities that Ronald had said he could make people disappear. A friend had even called Vicky and said that she had seen a Nancy Grace episode about Bethany's case, which named Ronald as a person of interest. Vicky confronted him and said his reaction terrified her. She knew something was wrong, but he now knew that she knew about Bethany. And she said the violence had escalated since that point. Vicky said if he was ever let out of prison, he would either come back to kill her or kill someone else. He was clearly a very dangerous and violent individual, and given everything Vicky had told them, he needed to be looked at once again in relation to Bethany's case. A dramatic twist in a local cold case tonight. That's right, this development could finally give local investigators the evidence that they need to bring charges against a person of interest in the disappearance of a young mother. Decker's then-boyfriend was arrested in November for attempted murder of his new girlfriend. That woman tells the DailyMail.com Ronald Roldan told her things which could implicate him in Decker's disappearance. Investigators combed the area near Bethany Decker's Ashburn apartment 4 years ago. They never found the 21-year-old. The young mother and wife of a soldier in Afghanistan was 5 months pregnant when she vanished. It's so hard not knowing anything and not being able to reach her. Decker and her husband had problems, and while he was overseas, she became involved with Ronald Roldan. After Decker disappeared, there was no activity on her credit cards or bank accounts. Roldan, a waiter at the time, became a person of interest but never charged. He moved to North Carolina, where last November at the home of his new girlfriend, Roldan allegedly went into a rage and viciously beat the woman. Loudoun County Sheriff's detectives have interviewed Roldan in North Carolina, where he is behind bars awaiting trial at this point. Despite the revelations from Roldan's alleged victim, he remains a person of interest in the Bethany Decker disappearance. I've seen the look in his face when he came back at me the second time that evening to kill me, and he was smiling, so I do believe that he cannot control it. It's what he does. He kills things. He violently beat me. He broke my neck in 2 places. He left the bite marks all over my back. He choked me out twice. He was suffocating me, and then the gunfight started. He just told me that he can make people disappear, and that I'd better be quiet, and I'd better not go to the police. That's what he told me, standing in my living room, leaning up against the sliding glass doors. I think he was just making himself clear. Vicky went on to tell her story on Dr. Phil. She had lost an eye because of him. Her neck had been broken in 2 places, and she was facing financial ruin due to the cost of the medical bills. But she was determined to keep telling her story and help the police build their case. She contacted Kim personally to tell her everything she knew and offer her support. The pair would strike up a close friendship, meeting for the first time on an episode of True Crime Daily. Hi. Oh, I'm so glad to see you. Me too. You are so amazing. Thanks. So strong. Investigators also found out that before he was seeing Vicky, Ronald was dating a waitress called April. She had pressed charges against him too when he pushed her down a flight of stairs, spat on her, and threw all her belongings outside. He agreed to pay her $2,500, and the charges were eventually dropped. Detectives working on Bethany's case made the journey over to his new prison to interview him again, but he was verbally abusive, shouting and swearing at them, refusing to talk. This only spurred them on more. Through his lawyer, Ronald maintained he had nothing to do with Bethany's disappearance. He said he was hopeful that Bethany would come home and was praying for her safe return. Mystery tonight now in Loudoun County. A young woman gone missing 4 years ago without a trace. The newest twist, a bone-chilling letter from the woman arriving 5 years after she wrote it. It's just one of many shocking turns in a case that continues to baffle detectives. Bethany Decker penned a letter to her future self when she was 19 years old. She wrote December 3rd of 2008. All of her plans were right there in black and white. Get married, have a child, start a career, go to Europe. She signed it. See you in 5 years, me. She had lots of dreams of what her future would look like, and it was nothing like this. She's really dropped off the face of the earth. Loudoun County detectives immediately visited Roldan in jail. He didn't really want to talk to me, so I just talked to him. While detectives fear the worst, Bethany's mother hopes she's in hiding. I pray that she's out there somewhere, that she got to a safe place. The lawyer for Ronald Roldan, Decker's boyfriend, he wouldn't return her phone calls. As for the husband, Emil Decker's attorney tells us he's willing to talk to detectives only if counsel is present. I'm Jennifer Donnellan, ABC 7 News. In March 2019, investigators said there had now been positive movement in Bethany's case. They didn't specify the development, but they did say it came after a search warrant of Bethany's Facebook account was finally issued and analyzed. The search warrant had been signed by Detective Michael Boone, a man who was actually instrumental in solving the murders of Hannah Graham and Morgan Harrington. Morgan Harrington's family had become close to Kim, offering her a support system. Over the next year and into 2020, things again went quiet, and the police didn't share anything with the media, keeping all their cards close to their chests. They were on the cusp of a huge break. November 2020. The news everyone had been waiting for almost a decade, finally broke. Bethany Decker, missing since January 2011. Now, after more than 9 years, it appears police are about to close this controversial case. In the works, the Loudoun County Sheriff has planned a long-distance arrest of Bethany's ex-boyfriend. According to the prosecutor, the charge in the case will be abduction. Now, upon his release from jail tomorrow in North Carolina, Loudoun County Sheriff's plan to pick up Roldan and bring him back to Virginia to be officially charged in the Bethany Decker case. The information that had pushed this forward showed that Bethany and Ronald's individual Facebook accounts were both accessed many times from the same IP address in the days around her disappearance. Ronald Roldan was finally arraigned on abduction charges, and, just 1 month later, the charge was upgraded to second-degree murder in the case of Bethany and Decker. Prosecutors said the circumstantial evidence was very strong, and it was a solid case. Ronald's lawyers asked for bail, but the judge said there was no way. He pleaded not guilty, and his trial was scheduled to start in August 2021, but this was pushed back to February 2022. The trial was then set back a final time when the county sheriff's office released a further 60,000 files against Ronald, and his defense team needed more time to go through everything. The new trial would be January 30th, 2023, and this date would mark just a day after the 12-year anniversary of Bethany's disappearance. Everyone now just had to sit, wait, and continue to be patient just a little bit longer. However, no trial would commence. It has been more than 10 years since Bethany Decker disappeared from her Ashburn home. Her body has never been found, and her former boyfriend pled guilty to her murder. Roldan was convicted and sent to prison in North Carolina in 2016, buying the Loudoun Sheriff's Office more time for its investigation, and when he was released in November of 2020, he was charged with Bethany Decker's murder. On Thursday, he pleaded guilty. The details of that agreement under seal until his sentencing. Willoughby's reaction to the plea? A feeling of relief and thankfulness. It helps me to realize that maybe God used me in this crazy way to make sure that Bethany got her peace. Roldan faces up to 40 years in prison when he's sentenced. In November 2022, 41-year-old Ronald Roldan pleaded guilty to second-degree murder. As part of his plea agreement, he was asked to say what had happened that day. Ronald claimed they had got into an argument in the apartment, and he pushed her. She fell and hit her head on the windowsill and died instantly. Too scared to call 911, he put her body into a large bag and dumped her into the trash compactor at the complex. He still denied using her Facebook account and maintained his story of it being accidental, and he panicked. Given his history of abuse and violence, police and experts doubt his claims of it being unintentional and a total accident. And his denial of accessing her accounts had also long been proven to be false. In February 2023, Ronald was given 12.5 years. He was actually sentenced to 40 years, which was the maximum. However, all but 12.5 were suspended due to his plea deal. He could still serve more time if he commits another crime or violates the conditions of his release. 12 years and a month of them waking up every day and not knowing is Bethany coming back. Hundreds of individuals have worked tirelessly in search of any evidence or information that would bring Bethany's killer to justice, and today justice has been achieved. Roldan only pled guilty in November, but it wasn't until 2 weeks ago when he confessed to detectives how she died as part of his plea agreement. And it was quite tragic for us to go from missing to murdered in just a sentence. I can't tell you how hard it was knowing that when we had our last Christmas that would be the last one, or the night before Bethany was murdered. She called me and she said, "Mom, I love you," is the last thing she told me. Bethany was an inspiration to me from when she was born, with her smiles, with her encouragement, with her love. Tonight, Roldan will have to serve more than 12 years in prison, but family says it still does not bring closure, but a painful reminder of how a loved one is still gone. She was not and will never be forgotten. May she rest in peace. Once he is released, he must be under supervision for 5 years, and is instructed not to contact any of Decker's family members. Through all the hearings, Kim and Vicky sat together and watched as he was sentenced. Bethany's family said they were angry that he will only be in prison a few months longer than they had spent searching for her, but they said they were grateful they finally had some sort of closure. So many lives have been affected by this case, and it was a long and painful wait for answers. To this day, Bethany's remains have never been found, and police feel it is unlikely they ever will be. Kim said all she can do is keep Bethany's memory alive and encourage people to be vocal and tell loved ones you care about them, because you just never know what will happen. She continues to work with Help Save the Next Girl, a national non-profit organization founded by Morgan Harrington's parents in her honor. It's a way of educating and spreading awareness by talking about safety and violence prevention. She said, "The night before Bethany was murdered, she called me and said, 'Mom, I love you.' That was the last thing she said." Story 4 Pontypool, homes for roughly 30,000 people, 2 of which were David and Linda Maggs, who lived together at 11 Lansdowne in Sebastopol. The couple had been together since 1988, but had initially met in 1977. Linda had been raising her 2 children, Carrie and Andrew, on her own, after her first marriage had ended. She worked incredibly hard to support herself and her children, sometimes working 3 jobs to make it happen. David had also been married twice before. They had been together for many years when they decided to marry, and in August of 2002, they tied the knot. Andrew and Carrie had welcomed David into the family, and the couple looked set to begin the rest of their lives together. 74-year-old Linda had an incredibly active social life. She was the member of a dance group and was often out with her group at dance clubs. She also loved being a grandmother and enjoyed going shopping for clothes with her beloved granddaughter. She took real pride in her home and garden, which was often the center for many social gatherings. Linda was incredibly close to her two children, and they shared a tight bond. She was always on hand to help or lend advice whenever needed. Her son Andrew described her as a beautiful, kind lady with a huge heart. Her 71-year-old husband David had worked as an accountant, but would later retire. The pair enjoyed traveling together all over the world, including the United States and Australia. However, there was one thing that was a source of contention for the couple: money. Prior to the marriage, David had wanted Linda to sign a prenuptial agreement, but she didn't. She said as they were married, everything should be shared between the two of them. However, once they were married, they had separate bank accounts and even paid for their own food if they went out for a meal, something her daughter Carrie thought was odd. David didn't share her busy social life. On the occasions he would go out with Linda to her dance shows and clubs, wouldn't engage or participate. Instead, he would stand outside the venue and smoke. In 2009, David had become more reclusive, as he had had his driver's license taken away due to having epilepsy. Over the next few years their marriage continued to decline. They would often argue over money, and neighbors could hear them fighting in the back garden. By March of 2020, their relationship had completely broken down. When coronavirus hit and lockdown orders were issued, David rang his GP and was prescribed sleeping tablets and antidepressants. His sister was concerned for him and said he was failing to look after himself properly. She would often bring him food and check on him. His day-to-day life consisted of playing cards, watching films, and smoking. He had been in ill health for several years, having survived 2 heart attacks and spending 5 months in hospital, as well as suffering from emphysema. Lockdown was also very hard for Linda. Having previously enjoyed a busy and active social life, not being able to see anyone meant she spent most days upstairs alone. After his heart attack in 2019, he was referred to a counselor. He was given an anxiety and depression score of 12, with anything over 8 being grounds for a referral. In August, he requested that his antidepressants were increased, and after this he said he was feeling much better. But in September 2020, another argument between the pair would do further damage to their already difficult relationship. David had called his sister one night and said they had been arguing again and asked her to go to the house. She said when she got there it was clear that Linda was very stressed. The argument had, once again, been about money. Linda had shouted "It's over, it's done," and David had replied "Just go," before going back into the house. 3 days later, Linda apologized to David's sister for the argument. On the 16th of September, 2020, Linda decided to start divorce proceedings and officially end her marriage to David, citing unreasonable behavior. After consulting a lawyer, she was advised not to leave the home, and David would also not move out. So they continued living together, but the pair were living separate lives, with Linda refusing to clean up after him or cook for him. David had the downstairs turned into a bedsit, with a lock on his door, and Linda had the upstairs. While she had purchased locks for her doors, she was yet to have them fitted. As they shared a bathroom and kitchen, Linda said she felt as though she was being stalked by him. He would often sit outside the bathroom while she was in the shower and wait for her to come out. An estate agent would go and look at the house and value it. He described David as chain-smoking and visibly shaking. David told the estate agent he would rather hurt his wife than lose anything. The estate agent described Linda as being very timid. When it became clear that the house could be sold as part of the divorce, in November of 2020, David was put in touch with a housing support worker who encouraged him to look into sheltered accommodation and renting as options for if the house sold. He expressed the same sentiment to the housing officer that he had to the estate agent. Linda was not going to get anything, even if it meant she came to harm. He told the support worker that he needed to go to the police, as he had thought about stabbing Linda. The support worker was so concerned that she spoke to her line manager, who advised her to call the police on the non-emergency number and also contact his doctor. The doctor phoned David that day and increased his sleeping pills and antidepressants. After the support worker had contacted them, the police went to the house to speak to the couple. When David's sister answered the door, she said she was in shock. She said the police explained that they were concerned for David's mental health, a sentiment she shared, saying he was a wreck and very depressed. David said he was surprised that she had contacted the police, but understood why she had. He said he felt the police didn't listen to him and that their visit wasn't worth it. An officer spoke to Linda, saying there were concerns for her safety. The officer said she was quite flippant and thought it was just his way of trying to get her out of the house, as the house was solely in his name. The officer said Linda had declined a domestic violence risk assessment and the option of a safe house, saying that David had never laid a finger on her. The officer told her to avoid arguments with him and keep her phone close to her. No further action was taken. By the new year, the pair were no longer speaking. Financial investigators had been brought on board to look into the couple's finances. This meant that the house would likely be put on the market for sale. On the February 5th, 2021, Linda was on the phone to her daughter Carrie. She told Carrie that she was worried about how David would react when he found out their finances were being examined. That same day, David's sister had called him at around 9 p.m. She said he seemed settled and was enjoying watching a film. The February 6th, 2021, 9:13 a.m. A disturbing 999 call is made. Is this an emergency? Yeah. Yeah, why? I think I just called your wife. Your wife is it? Yeah. Okay, what's your address? Are you at home? Yeah, call an ambulance just in case. And an ambulance as well, okay. So what's happened in between you and your wife today for this to have happened? Did you have an argument? Just call an ambulance and call the police. Yeah, you threw to the police. That's fine, okay. So I'm gonna log on now. And we'll call the ambulance out as well, okay? But what's happened? I stabbed her. You stabbed her, did you? Okay, have you got a knife on you now? Pardon? Have you got a knife on you now? No. Where's your wife? In bed. She's left in bed, is she? Yeah. Okay, what's your name? My name's David. Is it David I'm speaking to? David, yeah. Hi David, okay. I'm gonna be sending help out to you now, okay? Is there a lot of blood? Yeah. Yeah. Is she speaking to you? Or do you think she's passed away? She's passed away, I think. Okay, what makes you think that? Can you see if she's still breathing or is she talking? I don't know. I don't know. I just lost it. You just lost it. So did you have an argument? Did you? I just lost it. Oh, can you just come and help me? You're sorry? Just help me. Okay. We'll send help to you now. Okay. That's actually what I'm doing for you. I'm gonna type this up for you. Okay. Oh God, help me. As officers and other emergency services descended on the scene. Body cameras captured the moment they went inside the house. As the officer enters, 2 knives can be seen on the last step of the staircase. Stay where you are. Stay where you are. Who else is here? Who else is here? Right. Okay, this time you are under arrest on suspicion of murder. The time is 26 minutes past 9 in the morning. You don't have to say anything, but it may harm your defense if you do not mention when questioned something which you later on call anything you do say may be given in evidence. Necessity for your arrest at this time is to protect a vulnerable person and prevent any further injury to a person. Do you understand? Oh, all right. Just try and stay nice and calm for us, okay? All right. You stay nice and calm for us, okay? I don't know for what. She tried to steal 2 hoses off me. Okay. Till I lose it, I can't see. Okay. She spent 5 months in hospital last year. Okay. What was that for? Hard. Okay. She came to see me 3 times. The rest of the time, she ransacked the house, got hold of all the paperwork, destroyed all the paperwork. So I kept staying on this house as well. That just a few weeks before Linda was killed, she had been on the phone with David and asked him how the divorce process was going. She said he replied, I feel like I could stab her. She said to him that would mean he would go to prison. His response, I don't care. He was remanded in custody. On the 8th of February, he appeared at Newport Crown Court charged with murder. He entered a plea of guilty to manslaughter on the grounds of diminished responsibility, adamant that he had blanked out. Judge Michael Fritton would preside over the trial at Cardiff Crown Court, which began on the 11th of January, 2022. Judge Fritton told the jury, it's admitted David Maggs killed Linda Maggs, but there is a dispute about the circumstances in which he killed her. There's a dispute about his mental state on the day he killed her, and there's a dispute about his responsibility for killing her. Defense lawyer Sarah Jones argued that Maggs' mental health and depression would have clouded his judgment that day. Evidence of his past health clearly points to something very, very wrong with his functioning at the time. I accept it does not excuse what he has done, she said. Psychiatrist Dr. Nwangal Apathy told the jury, in my opinion, the degree of his impairment due to depression is significant. This is a case where there are clear and significant mental health problems. In my opinion, This is a case of diminished responsibility. But there wasn't a clear medical consensus, as another psychiatrist, Dr. Thomas Wynne, said he didn't think David Maggs had depression. The court heard that David felt he had been stung by his 2 previous ex-wives, and was adamant that Linda was not going to get any of his money. The prosecution told the jury that Linda was upset, scared, and anxious. She told a friend she didn't know what her husband was capable of. A friend told the court that Linda had explained they had argued when David had changed his will several years prior, cut her out of it completely, and decided to leave everything to his son. The witness said, about 5 years ago they were arguing about the will. She said she had to pick up an iron to defend herself. The witness also said she had spoken to Linda the night before her death, and they had talked about the divorce, with Linda saying she thought he would lose his temper, but added that he wouldn't hurt her, and in any case, she could call the police. The prosecution said that David had given Linda an allowance of £30 a week, and told her, no sex, no marriage, no nothing, meaning financially she would be solely reliant on her pension to get by. It was argued that David would become verbally abusive towards Linda, and would insult her, calling her thick and stupid. Other key witnesses would address the court, the estate agent and housing officer who had witnessed David's behavior and heard him make threats towards her life. This painted a very different image from the frail man, who was wheelchair-bound and struggled to get in and out of the prison van. David's sister also testified about the argument the couple had had in the garden in September of 2020, saying that Linda had been the one to lose her, and that she had never seen her brother use threats of violence until that altercation. The prosecution lawyer called Linda's death a vicious and repeated attack. The 999 call and police body cam footage were also shown to the jury, painting a vivid image of the chain of events that had transpired that day. It was also noted that he had only said he had blanked out, when he had been reminded that he was under caution, and anything he said could be used in court. After a day and a half of deliberations, the jury had reached their verdict on February 1st, 2022. The jury rejected his defense of diminished responsibility, and he was found guilty of the murder of his wife. On the 17th of March, 71-year-old David Maggs was sentenced to life in prison, with a minimum term of 20 years that he must serve behind bars. His defense lawyer Sarah Jones said that due to his health and age, however long his sentence was, he would likely die in prison. She said he had asked her to tell the court how sorry he was, and that he wished it had never happened. When sentencing him, Judge Michael Fritton called David a self-centered, self-interested, bitter, and unpleasant man. He would come to resent Linda in a whole variety of ways. He resented her still having a life, a social life, female friends, loving members of family. You resented her having the courage to stick up for herself and start divorce proceedings against you. I don't think you care about anyone other than yourself, he said. During the sentencing hearing, Linda's son Andrew gave a victim impact statement. You claim you can't remember anything, but I don't believe you. When you do remember, I hope it torments you as it torments us. On your wedding day, I made a speech and welcomed you into the family. I wish I had never, ever said those words. Throughout this whole process, you have not shown a single ounce of remorse, regret, or compassion. That does not surprise me. Mom always said you would never, ever say sorry. Andrew also added that Linda's headstone used her maiden name of Minahan and not her married name of Maggs. On behalf of all our family, we would like to personally thank all of the Gwent police officers that have been involved in the investigation. We would also like to thank all the witnesses that gave evidence in court, members of the jury for returning guilty verdicts. Without all your hard work, dedication, support, and understanding, we would never have got the justice for what we did. For Linda's heartbroken loved ones, being denied the chance to say goodbye was devastating. Having such a kind and devoted woman ripped away from them in the most horrendous of circumstances has left a void that will never be filled. Linda's memory will continue to live on through those who knew and loved her, and she will always be remembered as a devoted mother, grandmother, and friend. Story 5. 19-year-old Tong Xiao was born in the busy coastal city of Dalian, in the northeast of China, home to just over 6 million people. She was the only child of Cheng Sheng and Yang Shui, and the three of them were very close. They were all hard workers, and Tong had shown tremendous promise from a young age. She was both very creative and artistic, and analytical and academic, playing piano and dancing, with the hopes of one day being a biologist or a sculptor. But the truth was, friends and family said she really could have done anything she put her mind to. She gained a place at Dalian Yeming Senior High School, which is regarded as one of the best high schools in the city. Over the years, The school had earned an excellent reputation for producing top scorers in the college entrance exams, commonly known as the Gaokao. Those who win special awards and consistently excel can be granted admission to a university without having to take the Gaokao. Whereas Tong's boyfriend at the time won a place to go to a great university in China, Tong sadly did not. She was naturally upset, having worked so hard for it, and this meant her plans were very much up in the air. She now needed to rethink where she would go and what she would study. It would also see an end to her current relationship. She decided to make a big leap and push herself more out of her comfort zone than ever by planning on moving to the United States to attend Iowa State University and study chemical engineering. Her ever-supportive parents gave their life savings, the equivalent of $100,000, to support her in the big move. She needed to get a few more things ticked off, including the English foreign language exam. In July 2011 in Beijing, while studying for the exam, Tong met Xian Yanli, who was studying English as well. Li was also set to go to the United States to the Rochester Institute of Technology in New York. The pair hit it off and shared a lot in common, especially as they were both about to make the same huge move to the same country at the same time. Tong's parents met Li shortly after and said that although he seemed respectful, shy and quiet, they didn't think the pair were right for the long term. A few others shared the same view, but Tong assured everyone that the pair weren't exclusive or official, and things between them were quite casual. In September 2012, Tong finally joined Iowa State University, maintaining high grades from the start, and throwing herself into all aspects of college life. Her friends said when she wasn't studying, she filled her time with dancing, socializing at parties, and teaching Chinese to other students. She made friends easily, and was particularly close to the girls she lived with. Tong was the oldest of the 3 roommates, but they all called her little sister because she was the smallest of them, standing at 5 feet 2 inches. Her roommate and best friend Jean said Tong was so smart it drove everyone crazy. She was someone that was always saying she needed to study more, but would consistently come out with straight A's, and was always top of the class. Xin Yanli was still talking long distance, but he soon made quite a surprising decision. He decided he could no longer do the almost 1,000 miles between them, and asked to transfer to Iowa State University too. But he didn't have a place to stay, and his classes wouldn't start for a while, so he temporarily moved in with Tong and her roommates. Although they said they initially didn't mind, they did admit living with him was awkward. He didn't socialize, he didn't make an effort with any of them, and he didn't help with any chores, leaving mess everywhere. He didn't like Tong being out and away from him, wanting to know where she was, and who she was with all the time. Tong was still adamant that they weren't official, and was now growing tired of his possessive behavior. It was now about 2 years into Tong's studies, and everything seemed to be going fairly well. To the relief of her roommate, Slee was now in his own apartment, and officially enrolled in his own classes. But Tong was growing more and more distant from him, telling people she wanted to break things off properly and move on. Further issues had arisen when Lee gave police Tong's address as his own, when he was pulled over for traffic violations. This created more issues with Tong and her roommates, to the point where they didn't even like his name being mentioned and no longer wanted him to visit. On September 3, 2014, Tong spoke to one of her friends, who had recently become something more. The pair had been talking for a while, and romantic feelings were growing between them. She said the relationship between she and Lee was just causing issues, and she wasn't happy and hadn't been for a long time. However, she and Lee had pre-planned a motel break that weekend. She said she was going to go and work everything out when she was back, but it was looking likely that she and Lee would be parting ways. 4 days later, on the night of September 7th, Tong's father sent her a text message. She had told him she was trying to replace a pair of glasses that she had lost, and he was reaching out to see if she had got new ones. The response he got was short and blunt, saying she had borrowed a pair from a friend. He asked if they could talk via video, having not caught up in a while, but she said she was too busy. It was an odd series of messages, and he was a little sad that she had rushed off the phone. One of her roommates then also got a text, but this one had been sent from Lee's phone at 1:30 a.m. It read, "Hey, I'm still in Iowa City, but I lost my phone, so I'm using Lee's. He has a family emergency and may have to fly back to China today, so I'm going to catch a bus to Minnesota and visit some friends there. I'll be back in a week. Keeping Lee's phone with me, but it's running out of battery." Monday, September 8th, 2014, as Monday morning came around, people were surprised to see that Tong could not come back home. especially as she had classes. Surprise became concern, however, when several more days would pass, and she was still off the grid. Her friends and roommates decided to all come together to find out who, if anyone, had actually seen or heard from her on her phone over the last week. But no one had, and none of her friends online had heard anything either. Her roommate Jean contacted a few people she knew in Minnesota via social media, and they drew a blank too, saying unless they just hadn't crossed paths in town, she didn't arrive there to see them. On September 18th, with a bad feeling in the pits of their stomachs, her roommates filed a missing persons report. Police initially wondered whether Tong had perhaps gotten homesick and gone back to her parents, saying this wasn't uncommon, especially with international students. But they quickly realized this was not the case for Tong. There was no evidence to suggest that she had left the country, and there was also nothing to show she had taken that bus to Minnesota. Detectives tracked down the other student that she had recently started talking to, but he knew nothing either. Whatever they had between them was very new, and he said he didn't even really know her well enough yet to recognize that this was out of character, hence the reason he hadn't reported her missing. He was able to give them an alibi, which checked out. Students and locals were now sharing missing persons flyers and social media posts as well. Tong's disappearance had really rattled the campus and the community. Using car transactions and going off what her roommates had said, authorities found that Tong and Lee had made the trip to Budget Inn and Suites, checking into room 218 on September 5th, just as they had planned. The hotel owner, Ken, confirmed this too. He actually knew the couple reasonably well, saying they had been there before, and there was nothing unusual about them coming to stay that weekend. On September 6th, Ken said he saw Tong walking around the lobby by herself. The couple were also picked up on CCTV at a gas station, buying some bottles of water. Nothing seemed off, and it didn't look like anyone had followed the pair in or out. However, on the morning of Sunday, September 7th, Ken said he had noticed that Tong's car was now gone, and as the room was now empty, it seemed the pair had left in the early morning hours of September 6th. But no one had actually checked them out officially, while the hotel had cameras. Annoyingly, there was a glitch in the system, and any footage of them checking out had not been picked up. Ken said although there was nothing unusual about checking out of the hotel early, normally the couple were late to check out and had to be asked to leave. So knowing this, it did seem a little odd that he hadn't seen them go. Authorities searched Tong's apartment, where they found a receipt for a car she had purchased, which gave them her number plate. They sent the make, model, and plate numbers to other police departments in the area, hoping for a hit. They obtained a search warrant for both Lee's apartment and the motel room. Lee's apartment was a total mess. Everything was everywhere, and it looked as though he had packed up some of his belongings in a hurry. In the motel room, on some of the walls and the headboard were some very small dark-colored splatter marks. But without having any evidence to suggest anything had happened, to get the authority to start swabbing and collecting samples was going to take a while. They also had to deal with the issue that other people had stayed in that room after Lee and Tong. They looked into the rest of Lee's phone history. If his phone was still with Tong, this would give them more locations to look at. Between September 5th and September 8th, several calls had been made to someone called Paul. Most had been made from Ames in Iowa, and none had been made from Minnesota. One stood out, as it had actually been made all the way from China. They did have the text which indicated Lee had gone to China, but this didn't add up with Tong having his phone. The message that had been sent to Tong's friends, which said that she was still in Iowa City, had actually been sent when the phone was in Chicago, and it was confirmed that Lee had been in Chicago for his changeover flight, which turned out to be delayed. From here, not willing to wait in Chicago, he went to Los Angeles instead and flew to China from there. He clearly still had his phone, not Tong. Paul, the man who had received so many calls, agreed to do an interview with the police. He told them that Lee had reached out to him, asking for help to buy a ticket to China. Paul was confused, as he knew that Lee still had classes, but Lee said it was an emergency and didn't elaborate any further. Paul asked him if he needed a return ticket, but Lee said no. Police now knew that something bad had happened to Tong, and Lee was now an official person of interest in her disappearance. September 26, 2014. A call came in to say that Tong's 1997 Toyota Camry had been located. It was parked under a tree near some apartments just outside of Iowa City. One of the apartments nearby belonged to Lee. Residents said that the car had been there for weeks, and there was now a pungent smell coming from it. Officers now needed to wait for a warrant to open the car, but the smell coming from inside was one they knew all too well. When they finally were able to open the trunk, they saw a suitcase, and the smell got worse. Inside the suitcase was an already badly decomposing body. There was a dumbbell inside the case as well, and a bloody towel wrapped around the person's head. Well, at this point, we're not going to know for sure until we can do the autopsy. Certainly, the time spent looking for the vehicle took some time to figure out what vehicle we were looking for. It's unfortunate it ended this way. Although testing needed to be done, they knew it was Tong Xiao, an Iowa State University student. An autopsy has now confirmed that a body that was found in Iowa City is that of Tong Xiao. She was last seen in Iowa City September 8th. Police are not saying how she died. Tong Xiao's body was found in the trunk of her own vehicle on Friday. Iowa City police now say they are looking for a person of interest identified as 23-year-old Zheng Nanli, a Chinese international student. At the University of Iowa, the Iowa City Police Department believes that Li has returned to China now, but are still awaiting official confirmation. It would later be confirmed that she had died of asphyxiation and blunt force trauma. They could still not be sure about when exactly she had been killed, but they believed that she had most likely survived being beaten, only to suffocate after she was forced into the suitcase. Inside the car, they also found some travel documents belonging to Li, confirming his flight out to China, and Tong's smashed phone was on the driver's seat. Now they knew that Tong was deceased. They went back to the motel, this time with a forensics team. The bloody towel that had been wrapped around her head had come from inside the motel room. Using luminol, they were also able to find traces of blood on some of the furniture. CCTV showed Li in a TJ Maxx, buying the very suitcase which Tong had been found in. He spent a lot of time in the shop, comparing sizes and wheeling the cases around. He also purchased 2 dumbbells from a Walmart, one of which was found inside the suitcase. But even despite all of this, there just didn't seem to be any reason for it. They had just gone on a weekend trip away, only for this to happen one day into the trip. But soon, officers would talk to someone who would reveal something which changed a lot. It is an honor to be able to work with international students like Tong. James Dorset has lost 2 international students in his 20 years as director of the program. He gave a heartfelt eulogy, and it wasn't long before he was overwhelmed by the memories of Tong and their very first conversation. I tell myself that every time I go to the mall, when I see a Dipping Dots ice cream place, I will remember her. And one day perhaps, when I have the courage to face my emotions, I will try the ice cream and keep my promise to her. Tong's closest friend said it was still too soon to speak out about their beloved fellow Cyclone. I smile every time when I think of seeing Tong for the first time. And the final speaker this evening was a friend of Tong's family, a friend of her father, who traveled all the way from Virginia, not only to pay her own final respects here at the memorial service tonight, but also to express deep gratitude on behalf of Tong's family for everyone in attendance tonight. One of the calls Li had made around the days Tong had last been seen was to someone called Karen, and it had lasted over 3 hours. They tracked down Karen to ask about the nature of it all. It turned out that the conversation Tong had had in confidence with her friend on September 3rd, where she expressed a desire to leave Li and move on, had actually been overheard by Li. He said he had called her during her talk and, unbeknownst to her, she had somehow accidentally answered her phone. Li had stayed on the line for 30 minutes, listening to everything. Karen said Li was clearly upset and angry, and after this he posted to his social media simply saying, knowing this and what they knew about how Tong was found in the car, showed a real premeditation, someone that had meticulously planned this out and thought the killing through. They believed that the dumbbell in the case was part of a failed plan to throw the case into the river at a later date, and further analysis of Li's phone showed that between 3 and 4 a.m., he was close to the Skunk River. Police believe this is likely where he was looking to throw the suitcase in, hoping it would sink with the weight inside. When the detectives went to the river, they said it would have been obvious the water was too shallow, which is why he just left the suitcase in the car. They now had the full timeline of events. After overhearing the conversation between Tong and her friend, Li flew into a rage and set his plan in motion. On September the 5th, the couple checked into the Budget Inn and Suites as planned. On September the 6th, Li made his purchases, and this is the same night he booked his one-way ticket to China. It was also the last day that anyone saw Tong alive. On September the 7th, after killing Tong, Li returned to his apartment to gather some things, preparing to leave the country. He drove around debating on throwing the case into the Skunk River, eventually deciding against it, and just leaving it in the car instead. He then used his phone pretending to be Tong, texting her friends and Tong's father to bide himself more time. On September the 8th, Lee was in Chicago. He bought a ticket to Los Angeles, and a day later, he was back on the way to China and on the run. It wouldn't be until March 2015 that an arrest warrant was issued for Lee, but by this point, he was nowhere to be found. China does not have an extradition treaty with the United States, and this filled the police with dread, knowing they might not be able to do anything at all. Even a world away, this case is on the minds of many and making headlines in Chinese culture. I spoke with a professor tonight studying Chinese culture. He says that even if there's enough public outcry over there about this case, he says that could potentially bring the person of interest, is Xiong Nanli, back here to American soil. A girl's family, for instance, if the parents want to seek justice, and they may use public opinion on the internet to press the government to cooperate with the United States. Before he became president of the World Food Prize, Dr. Kenneth Quinn was ambassador to Cambodia and worked for the U.S. State Department for over 30 years. He says the willingness of the Chinese to help find and hold Lee for questioning might come down to one word: reciprocity, as in, if we help you, what will you do for us? So if it's a question of, are we going to give in to this American demand and hand over one of our citizens? Well, the answer to that is no, because it's not reciprocated. I think the Chinese would not be interested in protecting a murderer. This is their citizen that has been killed in another country. They will certainly want to have that resolved. Ambassador Quinn says one possible scenario could be the Chinese requesting to run this case through their own legal system, since the person of interest and the victim are both their citizens. He says he doubts the Chinese would just turn Lee over to the U.S., but as you heard Quinn say, there could be some diplomatic solutions, more informal ideas where both governments agree to something beneficial for both sides. Detective Gonzalez, who had been leading the investigation, was determined to get justice for Tong and her family. He said, "One clear message I wanted to send is, if something horrible happens to you like that, no matter what it takes, we're not going to stop. I don't care where you're from, what country you went to, where you fled to, we're just not going to stop." He, along with the district attorney in Iowa, contacted the Chinese authorities and the embassy. To their relief, they agreed to help from overseas and said they would track Lee down and sort out the arrest there. They issued a press release, and it was now national news in China. People on social media were sharing pictures of Lee's face, and the hashtag #FindLee was trending. In May 2015, Lee, who had been hiding out in Wenzhou and knowing there was no way out of it, finally surrendered, and he was taken into custody. Chinese authorities now needed everything from the detectives in Iowa in order to get the case officially transferred over to them. And in June, Lee was now officially under arrest and set to be tried in China for intentional homicide. 1 year later, Lee pleaded guilty, saying he had been irrational and impulsive. His story was that Tong had attacked him, and in self-defense, he had killed her. He denied any level of premeditation, claiming he was always going to go back to China, and it just all happened at the same time. He maintains that he was very much in love with Tong, and was devastated that she didn't feel the same about him. The whole hearing lasted just 6 hours, and Tong's parents were asked not to be present in the courtroom. But this did not stop them, with Tong's mother bursting through the doors at one point in a frantic state. She said her life was meaningless now, and she was feeling nothing but bitterness. Lee's parents met with Tong's parents, where they begged for forgiveness on behalf of their son and agreed to pay 2 million yuan, the equivalent of about $300,000 in compensation. The verdict for intentional homicide ranged anywhere from 10 years in prison to the death penalty, and Tong's parents said they were hoping for the latter when it came to it. Her father said, a Chinese saying goes, a murderer should pay for his crime with his life. A murder investigation that shocked Eastern Islands and crossed international borders is a closed case tonight. Former University of Iowa student, 24-year-old Zhong Yanli, will spend the rest of his life in a Chinese prison for killing his girlfriend. In June 2016, Lee was handed a life sentence, which could later be reduced to 13 years under Chinese law. But as always, whether this would actually happen or not remains to be seen. The news had devastated her parents so much that her father's health took a serious turn, and he was told he was unable to travel to the United States to bring his daughter's ashes home. Detectives back in Iowa said that the case set a precedent for how the United States and China can cooperate on international crime investigations. The district attorney added, We have many more students from China than we have had in the past here in the Midwest, especially in Iowa City. And so there's a real interest in making sure that there's a sense of safety and that people feel that they can come to the United States as students and be safe. Another reason that Tong's case had become so massive so quickly. 19-year-old Tong Xiao was determined and hardworking. She had made the brave move to the United States to push herself further, to challenge herself in all aspects of her life and make her family proud.